With that, I'd like to introduce Judge Jocelyn Fabry and Kate Hude, both of whom are involved in the Michigan Association of Treatment Court Professionals. Let me start with you, Judge. Can you tell me about yourself?
Sure, and thanks for having us here today, Brian. My name is Jocelyn Fabry. I am currently the Chief Judge for the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians Tribal Court, as well as serving as the President of MATCP. I've been on the bench for about 12 years, where I have the privilege of presiding over an adult healing to wellness or drug treatment court. Prior to my time on the bench, I served as a legal aid attorney for a little while, and my first introduction to treatment courts was as our tribal assistant prosecuting attorney. So I've had the joy of getting to serve in treatment courts for the majority of my career.
And how is a treatment court, the tribal treatment court, slightly different than say a drug treatment court?
Yeah, so obviously all of the key components of treatment courts, whether it's a juvenile or adult or tribal healing to wellness court, are the same. In our tribal healing to wellness courts, maybe the biggest difference is that we incorporate our tribal customs and traditional medicine practices. So the very structure of our treatment court is based on our tribal customs and traditions.
That's really interesting. Kate, tell me a little about you.
Sure. I serve as the executive director of the Michigan Association of Treatment Court Professionals. I've been working with MATCP since 2016. I am an attorney. So MATCP is my primary client, but I do work with some other nonprofits here in Lansing, Michigan, so the capital of the state, which serves us really well for all of the education and advocacy work that we do for MATCP. When I was practicing as an attorney, I did some criminal defense work, juvenile delinquency work, abuse and neglect work, representing parents and children. So while I have never served directly in a treatment court as an attorney, I have worked in the criminal justice realm. So I feel very comfortable understanding what our attorneys and judges and the rest of our treatment court professionals go through when it comes to working in that capacity.
So you became involved then with MATCP in about 2016, you said?
Yes.
And that was to become its executive director.
Correct.
And what are your duties in that regard?
Oh, well, they're wide ranging. Everything from, administrative work to organizing the trainings, the educational events, working hand in hand with our legislative director, Judge Harvey Hoffman, who is a retired sobriety court judge.
I know Harvey well.
Yes, helping to develop policy, and probably one of my biggest roles is just working on strengthening relationships for MATCP with other state agencies, other state associations. So I sit on some other work groups, and we do a lot of communication and collaboration and relationship building with those other associations and state agencies.
And Judge, how did you become involved in MATCP?
Well, Sue Dobrich, who I served on the tribal state judicial forum with, approached me one day and said, "Hey, I think you'd be great on the MATCP board." And before I knew it, I was involved with MATCP. So I have Sue Dobrich to thank for that, which I am learning quickly that a lot of us have Sue Dobrich to thank for. They're involved in different organizations. She has a knack for fitting people in positions she think would be helpful. But I think another colleague of mine and myself were the first tribal judges that were involved in MATCP, and that was back in 2014, I think.
I remember. It's really interesting that there's been such a strong tribal component on the leadership of the Michigan Association of Treatment Court Professionals, and that has been going on for a long time. Do you think it brings some value to the association?
I think anybody with a different perspective, and as our board has grown, in line with treatment courts in Michigan growing, now we have folks, we have peer recovery coaches on our board. We have, tribal judges. We have family treatment court judges on the board. And so I think there's such value, just like on a treatment court team, in everyone's specific perspective that they bring from their role to the team. The same is reflected on our MATCP board.
Right. I'm very familiar with the history of the Michigan Association of Treatment Court Professionals. Of course, it started out as the Michigan Association of Drug Court Professionals with Judge Schmay and Judge Hoffman, who had their first conference in Kalamazoo. I don't think either of you were there.
No.
When did you actually go to the first conference, Judge?
I believe it was my time, during my time as a tribal prosecutor. So let's see, that would have been about 2008, perhaps.
Okay. All right. So, and that you became a committed drug court professional at that point, right?
Yeah.
All right. How do you get membership in the Michigan Association of Treatment Court Professionals, Kate?
Yeah, so currently our membership model is that when you attend our annual conference, you become a member of the association for the year. And our membership, as Judge Fabry indicated, as treatment courts have grown, our membership via our annual conference has grown. Our largest conference to date was in 2018, and that was 980 treatment court professionals from around the state. So we are very proud of that.
That was before COVID.
Yes, it was before COVID, but we actually had pretty decent numbers in 2022. We had 748 for our conference in 2022.
That's very, very strong. And that conference is held throughout the state, is that correct?
Right now, we have just been kind of flipping back and forth between Grand Rapids and Lansing, because as we have grown, there are not as many venues available to us. So our options for the annual conference are somewhat limited, but we also try to get to other areas of the state. One training that we're particularly proud of that we've been doing since 2017 is our Upper Peninsula training. And we just had that in September, and we had 90 people from the UP. And you're obviously familiar with the UP, Judge, because you are a Michigan resident. 90 people at a training in the UP is very strong numbers.
Judge, you're actually a resident of the Upper Peninsula, which we in Michigan call UP. Have you been to that training?
Absolutely. Yeah, and like Kate said, it's one of the things that MATCP is extremely proud of. Was it 5 years ago, Kate? I think that I was talking with Judge Gino Salamone, who's also on our board, and at the time, the state of Michigan and treatment courts were really witnessing the direct benefits of medication-assisted treatment for our clients. And honestly, some courts were a little slow to buy in, so to speak, to MAT, medication-assisted treatment. And that was true in the Upper Peninsula. At that time, we were having some diversion issues with some MAT drugs. And so at the same time that MATCP was promoting the use of MAT because of the evidence, because of the research that says that it improves quality of life and reduces recidivism for our clients, sort of on the ground in the Upper Peninsula, we were witnessing some of the negative side effects from folks diverting their prescriptions, likely self-medicating. And so I approached Gino and we talked about the fact of, we really need to educate our treatment courts in the Upper Peninsula and bring the medical folks to the table with us to have those conversations so we can ask questions about our clients. And so that was sort of the genesis of the UP training, was trying to get treatment courts up to speed in the Upper Peninsula about the use of medication-assisted treatment. I think we can check that box now, based on our last treatment court, our last Upper Peninsula training. We are now talking about other things. MAT is widely accepted. No, yeah, scratch that part,
Right.
David. All right.
Judge Salamone, actually, who was a friend of mine, is a very innovative guy, and I know his MAT training is unique. It's a day-long training, as I understand. Is that correct? Kate?
Yes, it's a day-long training, and we wish that we could be there for longer, but one of the other issues that we know some of our Upper Peninsula and rural courts have is they just simply don't have as much staff. So it's hard for them to get away for more than one day. So we're very grateful that we can at least get them away from the court for one day, because we know how important that is, not only for the education and the training, but for the time with their team, to spend that time away from the office, away from the court, and a little bit on bonding time.
So what we've talked about, you have an annual conference, and when is it?
In 2023, it's going to be February 28th and March 1st.
Where?
In Grand Rapids at DeVos Place.
Okay, and people can go to your website to find information about that. Is that correct?
Yes, we actually have a new website specifically for the conference, and that's matcpconference.org. And of course, you can link to the conference website from our standard website, which is just matcp.org. But we have so much content related to the conference that we decided setting up a separate website was probably.
That's really interesting. How did you guys make that decision?
Well, we kind of borrowed it from our national organization, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. They have a separate website, and saw the success of having a separate repository for all that conference info. Okay,
so beyond the two conferences, of which are both educational, what else does the association do for its members? Judge.
Yeah, so this is, MATCP, I think, started by really focusing on education. And of course, we still certainly do that. That's a big focus of what MATCP does, is trying to educate our treatment courts and our treatment court professionals about the best practices and evidence-based practices, which are so important for treatment courts. But we've grown into some other areas, one of which is legislation that is, making sure particularly our Michigan statutes reflect those best practices and things that are going on in our treatment courts. And on the other hand, that legislation doesn't impede the progress of treatment court clients. So, you would be well aware, Brian, of the ignition interlock statutes that,
yes.
Go to assist our treatment court clients and sobriety courts. So that's, not only training our treatment courts, but really making sure our statewide practices are codified to benefit our treatment court clients.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and Kate, like she mentioned, has done a really wonderful job about improving our relationships with other state agencies and partners, and she can probably talk a little bit more about that.
Well, before we get to that, I mean, you have had a series of legislative victories, starting, I think, with that innovative practice of allowing people who go into a DWI drug court here in Michigan, known as a sobriety court, to get a restricted license. And I'm aware of the study that I think is on your website that reflects the fact that if you do that, people do much better in the program and are much more likely to be successful after. Is that correct, Kate?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are looking at expanding the capabilities of that ignition interlock to some of the other treatment courts. So we have a Senate bill right now that's pending to expand that for mental health courts.
That's really good. And you've just had a real recent victory about changing Michigan's laws with regard to marijuana. As I understood it, the old statute would have prevented judges from restricting marijuana use for people in a treatment court, and that's no longer true. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the old statute, although it wouldn't have prohibited it, it led to a lot of confusion, which, as we know, leads to sort of inconsistent practice throughout the state. What the new statute does is allow for judicial discretion in their treatment courts to determine whether or not medical marijuana would be appropriate, just like they would any other prescription drug that a participant had.
Beyond the education that you guys all do and the legislative accomplishments, I understand that you've written a number of guides, best practices, sorts of things, or at least been involved with the editing and writing of such. Is that correct, Kate?
Yeah, so we partnered with our state court administrative office. We call it here SCAO. And they are the administrative arm of the Michigan Supreme Court. And they have a treatment court division that they refer to as the Problem Solving Courts Division. So when certification occurred in Michigan, gosh, I think it's been about 4 years now, because they just wrapped up their first round of certification during 3-year cycles. MATCP was at the table with SCAO to help develop those best practice manuals. So obviously, again, looking to our national organization, taking the research and the evidence-based practices that they have developed for treatment courts across the country, and then molding those to be a little more Michigan specific. So we worked on that, and yeah, just a lot of just general policy work, just talking to organizations, providing comment when necessary, providing letters of support. And then the other one that I do want to touch on that we are extremely proud of, and this is again a nod to Judge Gino Salamone when he was serving as president. He again was recognizing the need for collaboration with the medical community. So we formed the Treatment Court Professionals Collaborative. And so that's a collaborative work group that MATCP is a part of, along with the Michigan State Medical Society, which is the largest doctor-driven association in the state of Michigan, the Michigan Psychiatric Society, the Michigan Osteopathic Association, and then our Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So we've done a number of things with that work group, including some regional trainings, a lot of just talking and discussing and figuring out what can we do to break down barriers for access to MOUD or MAT. What can we do to help support our doctors? But that's proven to be a very beneficial collaboration.
And you have another innovative program involving housing. Is that correct, Judge?
It is. So again, what's it been about 5 years, Kate? Judge Harvey Hoffman has sort of taken the lead on this, and in true Harvey style has been off to the races with it in Michigan. And, you know, we find in our treatment courts that if folks don't have sober living, again, and there's research that supports this, of course, as well, that their chances at long-term success are greatly reduced. And so having not just sober living, but really supportive sober living environments. And those are popping up across the state. I think there are 3 that are up and running now, or at least, you know, on the brink, and more projects in the works. And MATCP has been involved in that because having folks that are in treatment courts being able to access those resources certainly lends itself to the success of those participants, but also the structure that those participants are placed under by virtue of their being in a treatment court also bodes well for the other folks in those recovery houses. So.
As I understand it, Kate, these are separate units that are constructed by a private company who gets some tax benefit out of it, where courts can place an individual in one of these permanently. I mean, it's not a limited circumstance. They can live there actually for the rest of their life if they choose to. in their rental units, but it also has within it the supportive atmosphere that the judge has, including like treatment or testing or something. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. These are not sort of your typical sober housing units where perhaps somebody is limited to a 60 or 90-day stay. These are just actual apartments, but the only requirement for being a tenant of that apartment is that you are involved in the treatment courts. But even after you graduate, you have the ability to stay on, which we also know is really important. The recovery aspect of supporting our participants upon graduation is hugely important. And this is also modeled on a program, an organization called RS Eden, located in Minnesota. And we actually had the good fortune of flying to Minneapolis, myself, Judge Hoffman, along with representatives from our State Housing Development Authority and the developers to go and tour some of these apartment complexes.
All right. Judge, what do you think the greatest challenge facing the association is currently?
One, I think, is that there's so much we want to do. You know, we just got done with our annual board retreat where we sort of do our strategic planning, what we want to accomplish in the year. And of course, with a very talented board, there were quite literally dozens of wonderful ideas about all the things that MATCP would like to accomplish. So one is, you know, just sort of the time and resources to do everything we want to do, which really, again, goes back to our basics of educating, advocating for legislation to benefit our clients, and responding to training needs. You know, MATCP has the ability to be very responsive to treatment courts. You know, Kate now regularly, even without soliciting them, is getting requests from various courts across Michigan saying we have this need, or we have perhaps a new judge or several new staff on our team, and we really need some basic training again, or training on a specific issue. And that's something that MATCP would really like to be able to do. You know, as many requests as we get, we'd like to be able to respond to those. We just did a training to sort of in that regard in the Downriver, Southern Detroit area, where three, I think, right, Kate? 4 teams, entire treatment court teams were brought together. And it was sort of, you know, of course, the training was provided on the different areas like drug testing and motivational interviewing, but there's also a beauty in having the whole team together, and sort of a self-care almost for the team to kind of talk out their issues, and not just their team, right? They're with other teams. What's a comfortable space to do that? That's an area we'd really like to see MATCP grow and be able to provide to more courts. And so I don't know that that's a challenge, but maybe a challenge in how we can get everything done. The other challenge for our treatment courts is staff turnover. So treatment courts have been around now for over 20 years. Seems as of, you know, maybe COVID, and maybe just because it's been about 20 years, we're seeing a lot of turnover in the staff on treatment courts right now. And so again, that training component, that isn't just a, you know, it's a key component, but so necessary for our treatment courts, that everyone on the team is well trained in the best practices, evidence-based practices. So a lot of turnover in treatment courts right now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Some new folks in there excited and ready to do the work, just making sure they have the tools they need to be able to do that work.
Okay, where do you see the association in 10 years?
Oh gosh. I hope that we will have accomplished our goal. I think Judge Fabry did an excellent job of summarizing a couple of our challenges. When I started in 2016, I think we had like 170 treatment courts, and now we're up to 208 treatment courts across the state. So just catching up and being able to serve all of those courts is hugely important. So I would hope in 10 years that we are going to have an even more robust training agenda year after year, so that we can continue to do our annual conference, our UP training, but that we are able to provide these regional trainings that we know are really needed, that sort of more one-on-one approach. The downriver training was very successful and was very needed. So we need to keep doing that. There's a benefit to having something like the large annual conference because they get to hear kind of trends or new things, also get training on basics, but that one-on-one time is so hugely important. So I hope that we're going to be able to do, we are trying to do 4 next year, but I would hope that by, a decade from now that we're doing like 12 or 20 of those a year. That would be really awesome.
That would be great. Judge, last question to you. What do you think the greatest accomplishment of MATCP is?
Well, I think that Kate just mentioned the growth of treatment courts in Michigan, and I don't think that maybe would look the same without MATCP because we're kind of back there. Every member, every board member on MATCP is kind of behind the scenes doing those things we've talked about, the training, the legislative fixes to strengthen our treatment courts. And so I think just the fact that the treatment court movement is alive and well in Michigan, it's getting bigger. Right now, there's legislation pending for family treatment courts, although those exist in Michigan, small numbers, about, I think, 6 of them. And we expect that those will really take off here in Michigan, very much needed to, get our I like to say give kids back their sober parents, right, in the family abuse and neglect realm. And so I think we're just going to continue to see treatment courts grow in Michigan. And I think right there is the success of MATCP.
With that, I'd like to thank both of you for joining us on Justice Speaks. And I really appreciate all that you've told us. And I want to congratulate both of you on your really excellent work.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Judge.